In this video, I'm going to talk about deploying a more complex virtual machine architecture. This video is based on 3 different sections where you will learn about Azure Marketplace templates, GitHub Quick Start templates, and Azure Virtual Machine deployment from Visual Studio, allowing you to create your own customized deployment cycles. One of the first options you have available in Azure is using Azure Marketplace. Azure Marketplace is an extensive library of pre-configured virtual machine architectures. Some of them are pretty basic, other ones are rather complex. To give you some examples, and I'll talk about this a lot more when doing my demo, for example, deploying a SharePoint 2013 high available farm, like a SharePoint cluster, or a SQL Server always-on infrastructure, or deploying virtual machines having multiple subnets, or deploying multiple virtual machines at once. Besides the Azure Marketplace, there's also GitHub. As you might know, Microsoft is pretty open source nowadays, and they are extensively integrating with GitHub as a repository for providing you Azure templates. A lot of these templates are provided by Microsoft or even by the Microsoft community. And it's basically a free resource of more than 500 templates. These templates allow you to deploy IaaS resources, but also platform as a service, PaaS resources. For each and every template, it provides you documentation, JSON files, which is mainly the technical description of your architecture, as well as demo recordings. In my opinion, it's the recommended starting point whenever you want to learn about creating your customized Azure Resource Manager templates. The URL to connect to is github.com/Azure/Azure Quick Start templates. To show you how easy it is to deploy this architecture, let me start with the first demo, connecting to GitHub and deploying a complex virtual machine architecture from there. So I'm connected to GitHub Azure Quick Start templates, and as I already explained you, it's a pretty extensive list of a lot of different Azure resources that we can deploy. Now let me search for a domain controller, Active Directory. Without doing a lot of effort, I find a template that's called Active Directory New Domain, High Available 2 Domain Controllers, or even Active Directory New Domain, which, if you think about the infrastructure underneath, it allows me to deploy 2 virtual machines, creating Active Directory domain controllers, having the virtual networks available. Sounds pretty cool to me. From here, I have my deployment scripts, my JSON files, which specify the structure of the virtual machine layout. And from here, I can read what this template actually does. It's a template that deploys 2 new virtual machines, along with a VNet storage account load balancer, and creating a new Active Directory forest and domain, and so on and so on. Now next to that, it also gives me click the button below to deploy. Deploy to Azure. Since I'm already pre-authenticated, it will recognize my Azure credentials and allow me to deploy my resources directly from the GitHub template. Where the only thing I have to do is filling up all these fields, and even most of them are already pre-populated. So I'm going to use an existing resource group. I could also opt in to create a new one, but just showing you how easy it is. A new storage account name. Since this is Active Directory domain controllers, HA storage, I'm going to keep all the other information for now. So the VNet will be created, subnets will be created, 1 domain controller, 2 domain controllers. I'm going to rename the user account, allowing me to remember my password. It's based on a Windows Server 2012 and it requires a domain name. And at the same time, it allows me network security group configuration, allowing RDP ports to machine 1 and machine 2 on a different port. So it's basically nothing more than completing these fields and confirming my settings. Pressing purchase, I made a small error here. Let's check the help file DNS prefix for the public IP. Let's give it a try like this. And this looks better. So I was a little bit confused with the naming. Validation is done, and as in the exact same way as it started the deployment of the virtual machine before, it's executing the deployment for this virtual machine. So I'm going to keep it running for now. It will take quite some time before those two virtual machines with all the other underlying storage and network accounts have been created, and I'll continue my presentation. Now, a second way of deploying virtual machines is using Visual Studio. As I already showed you in the introduction, Visual Studio integrates extensively within Azure. It allows you to create, deploy, update, troubleshoot Azure resources. Now, obviously from a deployment creation point of view. There's a built-in wizard allowing you to create ARM templates, where the deployment wizard itself is integrated in Visual Studio. And I'll show you later on in a demo. And this works in my environment, Visual Studio 2015, but it also works as of Visual Studio 2010. And the version of Visual Studio itself doesn't really matter. It's working from Essentials all the way up to the Enterprise Edition. So with that, I'm jumping to another demo, deploying from Visual Studio. From within Visual Studio, I'm going to create a new project. I could reuse the one that I used for my previous demo, but let's create a new one. So selecting Cloud, Azure Resource Group, and from here I can use Visual Studio templates or again integrating with Azure Quick Start templates on GitHub. Now let me stick to the Visual Studio templates and checking this list what's available. I have Windows Virtual Machine scale set. I can deploy web apps, but I'm talking about virtual machines for now. So let's pick a Windows Server virtual machine with load balancer. So what it does is creating a PowerShell script, deploy Azure Resource Group, and two JSON files. Now these JSON files are pretty important as these are mainly the structure of the Azure Resource Manager ARM templates. So let me open up these files. There we go. I'm going to close my Cloud Explorer for now. So what it shows me here is my load balancer virtual machine. Within my JSON file structure, I have one load balanced virtual machine and another one load balanced virtual machine parameters. Now let me start with the first one, load balanced virtual machine. The JSON file itself is always having the same structure. It will ask me for parameters, providing settings, defining variables, and all the way down closing the JSON file. On the left hand side here, since it recognizes that it's a JSON file, I could also go from here, where it basically gives me a full list of all my parameters, my variables, and my resources. So I can see here that I have a resource, storage accounts, and at the same time when I'm selecting it, it will bring me to my JSON file structure, giving me all the different aspects of my resource. And even if you're not really familiar with JSON files, from here it will tell you you are creating a Microsoft storage resource type that requires a specific name, a location, an Azure resource group, and certain properties. If I would go to the network interface, it's about the same structure. The type is a Microsoft network interface, where in this setup I have two, one for the virtual network and one for the load balancer. I could add new resources from here, and then again having the integration with the wizard. So let's say I want to add another network interface. I just select it from the list, giving it a name, NIC3, confirming it, and this will be added to my deployment. Now let's say I'm jumping to my parameter section. The parameter section is empty, which allows me to basically customize and enter all my parameters during deployment. And then the third file is the deployment PowerShell script, which recognizes quite a lot of parameters, making sure that during the execution of the script it will import the Azure module if it's not already installed, uploading some other information like artifacts, JSON parameter files, using DSC. DSC is PowerShell desired state configuration that I will talk about in one of the other following videos, creating the storage accounts, and then basically picking up information from the previously explained JSON files. So from here, I'm going to execute a deployment, link to my subscription, creating a new or existing resource group, and completing the parameters. So from here, or I could enter it in the parameters file, but then it would be hard-coded. And from here, I'm going to recreate my credentials. Again, for this specific deployment, the image is pre-selected from the JSON file settings, the virtual machine size, or I could select another one, saving these settings, and then starting the deployment. It will kick off PowerShell in background, and that's basically it. As you can see here in the output, it's already starting to create my resource group and building up my deployment. If I'm jumping back to my portal, the other deployment is still ongoing. I select my resource groups, Azure Resource Group 2, and it should already show you one of those resources. And actually, the ones that I used in my GitHub deployment demo are already available. So I have my storage account, my virtual network, 2 network cards for each virtual machine, and my 2 virtual machine domain controllers are also being deployed. I can verify again the deployment cycle from here, where at this time it's deploying the Active Directory Forest out of the PowerShell desired state configuration integration. Jumping back to my Visual Studio, it tells me that my resource group is successfully created. So even within Visual Studio, I can actually get a detailed view of what's happening with my deployment cycle. If something would go wrong out of my JSON file, mistakes out of my deployment script that's not correct, or my parameters that aren't completed successfully, then it will also tell me about it here. allowing me to do some additional troubleshooting. I'm not going to wait for my resource to be deployed, because otherwise this video would take another 10, maybe 15 minutes, but you should get the message how easy it is to start deploying. So with that, we're at the end of this video, and I'm inviting you for the next one, talking about virtual machine high availability in Azure, and how to configure it and handle it.